Pro wrestling has a long and storied history, dating back as far as the Civil War era that even President Abraham Lincoln dabbled in an earlier version of professional wrestling. With longevity like that, pro wrestling has had many landmark moments in its history, which is why for the next 52 weeks, we are going to highlight the biggest events in pro wrestling history. Pardon the wrestling, but I am Bryan, and it's time for This Week in Pro Wrestling History. To this day, there are only a handful of names a wrestling fan could bring up to a non-wrestling fan and they would easily recognize them. WCW held a match between two of those names in 1998. WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hulk Hogan and Goldberg. In 1998, WCW was as hot as it's ever been, and while the WWF was hot on their heels, WCW was at its fever pitch on this particular episode of Monday Nitro on July 6th. Emanating from Goldberg's hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, over 40,000 fans packed Atlanta's Georgia Dome for a showdown between the hometown hero and nWo's Hollywood Hulk Hogan. At the time of this match, Hogan wasn't the only one carrying gold, as Goldberg was also the United States champion at the time, and not to mention his legendary undefeated streak. The rocket ship was attached to Bill Goldberg so much so that he is able to claim a clean pinfall victory over one of pro wrestling's biggest icons. As long as you pretend nothing happened after this iconic moment, WCW was sure looking good at this point in 1998. WCW is going to continue getting some notoriety during This Week in Pro Wrestling History because arguably the most iconic moment in wrestling history happened on this day, July 7th in 1996. Now, we won't get to talk about it until next year because the day fell a week before we started, but in the span of 2 weeks, the wrestling world featured its two most legendary moments in its history. The birth of Austin 316 at the 1996 King of the Ring, and the moment we are about to discuss, the formation of the nWo. If I am the first person to somehow talk about professional wrestling to you, kind viewer, let me enlighten you. In 1996, we saw the, at the time, seismic debuts of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash in WCW, formerly known as Razor Ramon and Diesel respectively in the WWF. Their leaving was a huge story, so much so that WCW played off of their debuts as a moment that wasn't supposed to happen to give off an unscripted feeling.
I have no idea.
Hey.
Wait a minute. I can't believe what I'm seeing.
You people,
What's with him?
you know who I am. But you don't know why I'm here.
Fast forward to the build for Bash at the Beach, Hall and Nash teased that they would have a third man in their match against Lex Luger, Randy Savage, and Sting. Near the end of the match, Hulk Hogan appeared, leaving everyone to believe he was there to save Randy Savage from Hall and Nash. However, Hogan would rear back and drop the leg on Randy Savage, completely shocking the crowd, and for the first time since leaving the AWA, Hulk Hogan had done the unthinkable. He had turned heel. What would follow would be an iconic promo from Hulk Hogan with Nash and Hall at his side and the WCW crowd pelting all of them with trash. And for the first time since Vince McMahon went national with the WWF, they would have not only true competition from WCW and the nWo, but for 83 straight weeks, WCW would beat the WWF head-to-head in ratings on Monday nights. There's no arguing that Hogan, Nash, and Hall's nWo was a universe-shifting moment in professional wrestling history. Nearly 70% of this channel's audience was not even born when the very first King of the Ring took place. The inaugural King of the Ring event is actually notable for a few reasons. This was the very first WWF show to take place at a football stadium. At this point in time, it was rare for the WWF to hold a show at a stadium, and this was actually only the second time and the first time since 1969 when the then WWF held a show at Fenway Park, home of the Boston Red Sox. 1985 would house several big stadium shows, including at the former home of the Seattle Mariners, the Kingdome, and both the Ohio and Michigan State Fairs. But starting off the WWF's return to a stadium was the King of the Ring that took place at Sullivan Stadium, not too far away from Fenway Park. Another notable fact about the 1985 King of the Ring is that it was a house show. Yes, a house show at an NFL stadium. The King of the Ring concept has had a tumultuous history, starting off as a house show, disappearing for a year or so, then returning as a pay-per-view, the birth of Austin 316, disappearing again, showing up as a random tournament on TV, disappearing once again, and now recently existing in conjunction with the Night of Champions pay-per-view event. This particular show in 1985 would see Don Morocco go on to beat the Iron Sheik to be crowned the inaugural King of the Ring. And in the main event, Hulk Hogan successfully defending the WWF Championship against Nikolai Volkov. I have to admit, I am quite giddy about discussing this one. Bash at the Beach quite literally had both WCW's greatest moment in its history and its worst moment in its history. This event was such a monumental failure in the history of WCW that it has an entire Dark Side of the Ring episode dedicated to it. This pay-per-view, from a wrestling standpoint, doesn't even stand on its own, as it was peak Vince Russo booking at its worst. We're only going to focus on the main story, however. What happened entirely is up to if you'd rather believe Vince Russo or Hulk Hogan's side of the story, but here's what we do know. Hulk Hogan was set to challenge Jeff Jarrett for the WCW Championship at this pay-per-view. Hogan, having creative control, wanted to win this match and leave as champion. However, as the legend goes, Vince Russo wanted Jeff Jarrett to win and lose the belt to Booker T later the same night. When the match between Hogan and Jarrett begins, Jeff just falls down laying flat on the mat waiting for Hogan to pin him, which Jarrett was told to do so. At this point, Vince Russo, who was ringside, started yelling at Hogan, "If you want this, pin him," and he threw the belt in the ring at Hulk and left ringside.
Yeah, Hogan, I don't know what to say. I don't know if Hogan has asked for another microphone. I think he wants to talk again. So fans, we apologize. Russo, what a return.
Is this your deal, Russo?
Wow.
That's why this company's in the damn shape it's in, because of bullshit like this.
Immediately after the match, Vince Russo came back and cut a scathing actual shoot promo on Hogan. And this included firing Hogan. With Hogan's creative control in his contract, he sued Vince Russo and the WCW after this incident for defamation of character. This would be the final appearance of Hulk Hogan in WCW, a fitting departure encapsulating the quick rise and fall of WCW. The professional wrestling landscape was a far different beast in 2011. WWE was firmly at the top, and the valiant effort of TNA trying to compete was enough to get Vince and Bret Hart to make up, but no one was competing with WWE at this point in time. Not seriously, anyway. While we often talk about TNA's shortcomings around this time with the television shows featuring the likes of Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair still wrestling in the 2010s, TNA still housed some of the greatest wrestlers in the world. Among those were a tag team known as Generation Me, Max and Jeremy Buck, or more popularly known as Matt and Nick Jackson, the Young Bucks. July 10th, 2011 would feature Generation Me's final match and last appearance in TNA. Frustrated with TNA's booking at the time, as well as their monetary compensation, they were ready to walk away from professional wrestling at the time. Had this happened, AEW would have ceased to exist, or not exist at all. The Young Bucks leaving TNA caused a ripple effect in wrestling history, because while the Bucks had made their name in PWG and elsewhere on the indie scene, leaving TNA eventually led them to New Japan Pro Wrestling and joining the popular Bullet Club faction led by Prince Devitt, now known as Finn Balor in WWE. Matt and Nick's highly rated tag team matches throughout New Japan and Ring of Honor, as well as the eventual formation of the Elite with Kenny Omega, continued to increase the popularity of independent wrestling. And in conjunction with Ring of Honor and the increasingly popular Cody Rhodes, the Young Bucks would be an integral part in the All In event in 2018. And of course, the success of All In would lead to the creation of All Elite Wrestling, with Cody Rhodes, Kenny Omega, and both Nick and Matt Jackson as EVPs, with Tony Khan leading the way as its chairman and CEO. The Young Bucks bet on themselves, asking for their TNA release, and I would say it paid off incredibly, as for the first time since WCW's closing, WWE has a true competitor in the professional wrestling landscape. WWE had previously used Florida Championship Wrestling as its developmental territory, but on July 11, 2013, the WWE Performance Center had officially opened. This would be the de facto training facility for future and even current WWE superstars. While today we know it mostly as the weekly home for the NXT television show, it originally wasn't designed with that in mind. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic played a large part in the Performance Center becoming a television taping destination. The Performance Center is home to a complex facility with a full medical and sports science wing and, of course, training equipment with several wrestling rings. This gave WWE its own in-house training facility for its contracted talent. Many current stars will utilize the Performance Center as well during rehabilitation after injury, as well as provide mentoring to trainees and NXT talent. And while it's normal to see NXT weekly television shows take place in the Performance Center, as we mentioned already, the pandemic also forced WWE to hold Raws and SmackDowns there for a period of time, as well as WrestleMania 36. The Performance Center was a crucial asset for WWE during this time, and of course, allows WWE an in-house facility to continue to develop their talent. Right in the middle of the high marks of Bash at the Beach 1996 and the extremely low marks of Bash at the Beach 2000 comes Bash at the Beach 1998. Officially presented as WCW nWo Bash at the Beach like many WCW pay-per-view events at the time, this featured a star-studded main event with stars from the just finished up NBA Finals at the time. Hulk Hogan would team up with Chicago Bull Dennis Rodman, both representing the nWo, against Diamond Dallas Page and the Utah Jazz's Karl Malone. The match was an absolute mess, as was most of the show, which it was WCW, so of course it was. But this match did garner a ton of press, considering the Bulls and Jazz just finished off their NBA Finals clash not even a month prior. So the real-life tie-in was a perfect inclusion in this match. However, as stated, the match was an absolute mess and was just the complete epitome of the mess of WCW booking at the time and its eventual downfall. This week in pro wrestling history featured quite a few landmark moments. But what was your favorite? Leave it down in the comment section below. And if you want to see an expansion of one of these events, let us know in the comments as well. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, as that is the easiest way for more wrestling fans like you to find this video. And of course, consider subscribing to the channel for more content just like this. Pardon the wrestling, but I am Bryan. Thank you for watching.